Hello, everyone. I'm David Vaucher. Welcome to Return on Racing. The Return on Racing podcast is powered by Vaucher Analytics, which helps race teams and drivers drive efficiencies off track so they can fuel success on track. Return on Racing is also brought to you by the Motorsport Sponsorship Accelerator, the most cutting edge resource out there for finding, maintaining, and building long term sponsorship relationships. Today, I want to talk about something that is highly relevant to the world of racing now and perhaps even since its inception, and that is cost. However, before I get too deeply into this, I want to say that this is a very quantitative piece of work, and it would just be a nightmare for both you and me if we were just reading through and listening to lists of numbers. So, what I'll do is post a link to the original analysis that's on the Vaucher Analytics webpage, and I'll do that in the show notes. I think that's the best way to consume this, would just be listen to the podcast for the high level summary. And if you're interested in finding out more, go to the show notes, click the link to get to the report, and you'll find all of the relevant detail there. With that out of the way, let's talk about the true costs of racing, a comprehensive breakdown of a hypothetical LMGT3 seasonal budget. Running an LMGT3 racing team is surely a thrilling endeavor, but it's also an expensive one. I'm about to read to you a quote, which is a vivid illustration of the sums involved. For teams racing for track success, managing finances effectively on and crucially off it can make or break a season. And to illustrate that, here's a quote from WEC commentator Graham Goodwin that he said on an episode of the Marshall Pruitt podcast, number 1553. At the moment, budgets are a massive talking point. In particular, LMGT3, and for that matter, for teams that are aspirants, privateer entrants in the future in hypercar, let alone the manufacturers who pick up most of these bills. When you look at the kind of budgets that we're talking about now for an LMGT3 car, to give you an idea, it's of the order of about 5.2 million euros per season for a GT3 car, end quote. Such a sum of money annually is considerable, so the need for strategic financial management is paramount. At Vaucher Analytics, a consulting firm dedicated to optimizing costs and increasing revenues for race teams, we understand the importance of every euro. So what I'm about to read to you is an in-depth breakdown of LMGT3 racing expenses, highlighting where budgets go, and in the process, highlighting avenues for cost optimization, and that is something we'll explore more in the next podcast episode. So let's first talk about important assumptions and disclaimers. This breakdown is purely illustrative. Based on research and best practices, no individual team's information is being divulged. I would also tell you that this analysis is not perfect. It might not even be 100% correct. And that is not down to the work that's being performed. That's just due to the nature of the work. Unless you're looking at actual invoices and actual bills, you can never be sure that what you're saying is 100% representative of the industry. And frankly, that might not even be the case. It would just be 100% representative of the team whose statements you're looking at. Point here is that do not trust anyone that says they have the right answer in terms of cost. The important thing is to have a methodology that's defensible. Point number 2, I did reach out to professionals in the motorsports industry for additional validation of these findings, because even though the nature of the work is that it's imperfect, that doesn't mean that you still can't get validation from it. Unfortunately, no one answered, so if you would like to provide feedback on this, questions, comments, just any kinds of thoughts, I would love for you to do that. The address is contact@vaucheranalytics.com, or you can use the contact page via the website, which is www.vaucheranalytics.com. Third point on methodology is that this analysis assumes that one LMGT3 car is being run. A second car will certainly add to the overall team cost and perhaps skew the allocations calculated in this particular article and podcast, but the extent to which this happens is out of scope. In other words, if you double the car, you may not necessarily double the cost, but the extent to which that actually adds to the cost burden, that's for an analysis that might be done sometime in the future. Number 4, as the quoted budget references an LMGT3 car, the length of the season and race locations are assumed to be the WECs. In another series, these cost drivers will likely be different, and so the overall cost will follow. Point number 5 is that you may want to generalize this study to GT3 cars. Though LMGT3 cars do differ from what we'll call conventional GT3 cars, for instance, the use of torque sensors, which can easily add tens of thousands of dollars to the cost of a car, the hypothesis at the moment, in the absence of other data and if the factors that I've already listed are held constant, is that while the absolute cost between the two will differ, the overall cost breakdown should be similar. So if you're talking about running a GT World Challenge GT3 car, for instance, on a percentage basis, the assumption is that you can probably take the breakdowns that I'm talking about today and apply those at least to get you started if you're trying to run a similar analysis. Point number 6 is that even if cost structures for LMGT3 and GT3 are similar, the euro values quoted in this article are for LMGT3 cars only and are current as of October 2024. So percentage you can carry over, euro values that will differ depending on what your particular series and car look like. And then finally, this is a point on math and in terms of the results I'm about to read to you. If you try to add up the bottom and or top ends of each range, because I'm presenting every category as a range, you will find that the sums do not total to 100%. What I've instead opted to do is to make the average of each range sum to 100, with the implication that a given team's actual share in the overall cost will fall somewhere in the given range. So to make things work in terms of math for a nice coherent methodology and article, I wanted the average to sum to 100. But if you're an individual team, I'll just presume that you fall in that range. And of course, once you add up all your values, that will get you to 100%. But for this particular analysis, don't try to add up the top and bottom of each range. It will not get you to 100%. So let's go ahead and first, just to get everyone situated, let's actually list out the categories that are going to figure in this breakdown. So first we have personnel and team operations, then we have parts, maintenance, and repairs, then logistics and travel, then race entry fees and testing, followed by vehicle purchasing, leasing, and depreciation. Then we have fuel and other consumables, and then there is a miscellaneous category. And I've read those in descending order of importance. So that kind of gets everyone situated before I start running off numbers. So the first category is the most expensive one, or rather the most onerous on the overall cost structure. That is going to be personnel and team operations, coming in at 36 to 39% of the overall team budget. The backbone of any race team is its people. Personnel and team operations represent one of the largest budget categories, generally around 2 million euros. To avoid confusion with findings further along in this analysis, it's important to mention that team operations are about keeping the team running and competitive, while logistics and travel, that's a category I'll get to shortly, ensure that the team and car are physically present and ready to participate. Both are essential, but cater to different aspects of a race team's needs. And by the way, if you disagree with this categorization, that's fine. If I were to come on site and do the same thing for you, we would of course agree on the bucketing that is most coherent with what you're running within your team. But for this analysis, that is what I have opted to do. Number 2, so the second largest cost category is parts, maintenance, and repairs. This accounts for between 26 and 28% of an LMGT3 budget, and it comes as no surprise. LMGT3 racing puts immense wear on cars, especially when competing in endurance events. Teams typically allocate about 1.5 million euros to parts, maintenance, and repairs, and this category will include consumables, pit equipment and garage setup, routine and preventative maintenance, and repairs and damage control. And I've got more detail on that if you go to the article on the Voshanalytics website. Third, most or heaviest category rather on the cost structure is going to be logistics and travel, accounting for 11 to 13% of the overall cost, which is about 700,000 euros out of the 5.2 million that were listed at the beginning of the podcast. So this will account for vehicle and equipment shipping, customs and import fees, and accommodations for non-personnel logistics. This is then followed by overall group number 4. This is going to be race entry fees and testing, running at about 9 to 10% of the overall budget, or about 500 million euros. And you can get more information on what this covers in the article on the Voshanalytics website. Then we have vehicle purchase, leasing, and depreciation. That is about 7 to 8%, or 400,000 euros out of the overall cost structure. This is followed by fuel and other consumables, which is 3 to 4%, or 200,000 euros out of the original cost. This is followed then by marketing, hospitality, and sponsorship activities at 2 to 3% of the overall cost. And this is not a small number, by the way. This is about 200,000 euros. And what you have to consider here is that when we think of marketing, hospitality, and sponsorship activities, I think that the inclination is to think this is all revenue. So we have locked in a sponsor, all the revenue comes our way. But where teams get stuck is they forget that there is actually a cost to deliver that. Now, that cost is going to vary depending on the sponsorship package to which you've agreed. But you have to be really careful to not confuse revenue with profit margin off of that sponsorship deal. So going into any sponsorship deal, make sure that you understand exactly what your cost of goods are that goes into it. And really, that allows you to only account for the margin towards your racing activities. And the proof of that is that we get to a point where out of an LMGT3 budget of about 5 million euros, 200,000 of that is spent on marketing activities. So just be aware of what your cost of goods look like. Finally, there could be a miscellaneous category, which is going to be about 0.5%. It is not necessarily large in terms of percentage terms, but it will add up in absolute euro costs if you're not careful and if your budget is on the high side. So, with that, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this overview of the hypothetical LMGT3 cost budget breakdown. And before we leave, I would like to encourage you, please, to sign up for the Return on Racing newsletter. The Return on Racing newsletter delivers sponsorship insights, technical news, some race news as it pertains to the cost structure of racing teams, and that will be delivered to your inbox every week in less than 500 words. You can sign up for that directly on the front page of the Vaucher Analytics website. It's www.vaucheranalytics.com. Also, I do want to encourage you again to check the show notes. Click the link, it will take you directly to the article with all of the analysis and all of the supporting figures, links, and details. Thank you so much again for spending your time with me on this episode of Return on Racing, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode where we go through some cost savings that can be achieved with this budget breakdown as a benchmark. Thank you again. I'll talk to you on the next episode.